Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our panel. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I'm a content publishing coordinator at Nexus Marketing and your moderator for today's panel. Our topic today is fundraising during difficult times, what to keep in mind. And as usual, before I introduce our panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have some quick logistics to cover. First of all, I'd like to say that NXUnite, made in partnership with Nexus Marketing, is a new online community resource for the mission-driven industry. The NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting relationships and serve as a hub for connection in the mission-driven sector. As you saw in our video, on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cause-driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks here with me today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our fantastic audience. At any time during the panel, please feel free to submit your questions via the questions tab. And if you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics questions, my team member Anton will be in the chat as the NXUnite team username to do his best to assist. Also, just wanted to say this panel is being recorded. It will be accessible to you if you are logging in live, as well as if for our members who registered and didn't get a chance to watch, as well as accessible if you want to share it with anyone. People can register after the fact and watch the recording. So you'll be able to hear all of the insight as many times as you would like. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I do want to thank you all for attending the panel, whether you're attending live or you're watching the recording. We're very excited to be in touch with you, the mission-driven community. I really enjoyed looking through everyone's registration, seeing all the different organizations represented and all the different missions. So thank you for joining us, taking time out of your day, and really looking forward for you to hear from our amazing panelists, who I will now introduce. Julia Beltran is the Partnerships Manager at Double the Donation, the leading automated matching gift software provider. Through her role, Julia works with top fundraising solutions to help nonprofits and educational institutions raise more revenue through employer matching gift programs. Great to have you, Julia. Sabrina Walker Hernandez is the president and CEO of Supporting World Hope. She has over 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, fundraising, and leadership. She grew her operation revenue from $750,000 to $2.5 million and completed a $12 million capital campaign. She is certified in nonprofit management by Harvard Business School and is a best-selling author. Really excited to have you here with us, Sabrina. Shannon McClure is the principal consultant and owner of McClure Nonprofit Solutions, LLC. Cultivating passion for a product, idea, or organization and driving engagement is what she loves doing. Shannon creates and leads dynamic and happy teams and designs effective projects driven by strategy. The result is an organization closely aligned with people, businesses, and foundations who care most about supporting it. She has successfully led marketing and fundraising efforts in the realms of the arts, social service, faith-based organizations, and higher education. In 3 years as a capital campaign consultant manager, Shannon has led campaigns that raised over $15 million for her clients. Glad to have you, Shannon. And Meredith Gray. Meredith is the senior marketing manager at Fundraising KIT, and she has always had a passion for work that makes impact. Having spent over 7 years working in fundraising, she has gained extensive knowledge in marketing, peer-to-peer events, and sponsorship. Having experienced it firsthand, she understands the challenges nonprofits face when building a fundraising strategy and loves to find new and creative ways to leverage data to increase revenue. Very glad to have you all and really looking forward to getting started. So Julia, I'm going to have you start us off with the first question, which is, over the past 2 years, nonprofits have had to navigate a number of challenges. What do you hope nonprofit professionals have learned or will learn on looking back at the last 24-ish months?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's probably endless different topics that you can talk about with this question, that I'm sure there's a lot that we learned, right? When I first heard you say that, I think two things came to mind. The first one is thinking about differentiating your sources of funding as a nonprofit. I think obviously we hear differentiate your assets all the time, or hear that common phrase of making sure you don't put all your eggs in one basket. But I've seen it happen with, unfortunately, nonprofits that they just rely so heavily on maybe a certain type of grant funding that they've gotten in the past, or they rely really heavily on a couple major donors that have funded their mission, which is awesome. It's great to have like those really solid sources of revenue. But I think probably over the last 2 years, we've all seen that nothing is really guaranteed, maybe the way that we typically think it is. Like you imagine you wake up every day and you'll just qualify for the same grants, or you'll still have the same opportunities to host your gala or whatever it is that you rely on really heavily to fund your mission. And so I think that was the first thing, is just not relying on one avenue and trying to find maybe different sources of giving, even if that is lower hanging fruit or things that aren't as hugely impactful as your main source of funding, but that you can still have kind of this fallback method if things don't go to plan or if things are super shaken up. And then the second one that I was thinking of is just being on top of technology trends in the industry. I think it's really easy to just have maybe a check in for yourself where you hop on Google and see what sort of things are available to your organization, because we of course saw this with the pandemic, that like before people used Zoom, maybe like maybe you'd hopped on a Zoom meeting or maybe you'd hopped on a Skype call or something. But now I think it's an integral part to most companies and nonprofits alike, that everybody is on Zoom most of the day, honestly. Or even us being in this panel right now. Of course, we could have done that before 2020, but I think it became so much more normalized to have this sort of this type of tech really integrated into our work days. And so, since we just never really know what's going to happen, knowing what tools are available to you and available to your nonprofit can make fundraising a lot easier, even if you're not adopting those tools immediately. But if you just know that there are solutions to automate certain workflows, or ways to organize your database or something like that, if you kind of have that technology card in your back pocket, it can be a lot easier to pivot if you do need to make a huge shift, or like really need to optimize processes if something's a bit surprising in the coming years.
Absolutely, absolutely. As you say, I'm not sure we would be on this panel without kind of the 2020 urge to everyone push online and have us all be really comfortable giving presentations just like this. So thank you so much for starting us off. Sabrina, I'd love to have you jump in. After reflecting on the number of challenges nonprofit organizations have had to overcome within the last 2 years, what do you hope professionals in the sector have learned or will learn when looking back?
So I'm going to piggyback on something that Julia said, and that's going to be around fund diversification. I tell nonprofits all the time, no more than 20% of your budget should come from one source. So if you are the CEO that's managing that budget, you should always try to keep track of that. Because again, as the pandemic showed us, you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. And if I did put my eggs, or a larger percent of my eggs in a basket, it will be the individual donor basket. Because when people give to you, that doesn't tend to change. Whereas a grant, their focus might change, or they might not be eligible for that anymore. So building relationships should should have become even more crystallized to people, that it really is about relationships, relationships, relationships across the board. Do I have a good relationship with my board members that are going to show up for this organization in a time of crises? Do I have good relationships with my funding sources, particularly individual funding sources, individuals that they're going to show up for me in the time of a crisis? Because if you didn't have those things as a nonprofit during this pandemic, then you found yourself really floundering. And that wasn't a bad place to be. So hopefully, if you had those things, you thought, whew, I'm better than what I thought. We did good. And if you didn't have those things, you know what you need to work on now. There's always room for growth. There's always room for improvement. So take these lessons that have been learned from the last 2 years and put them into practice to help make your organization better, so that you can therefore serve your clients better.
Thank you. All right, Shannon, love to have you jump in. What do you think we need to keep in mind and learn from the past 2 years?
I'm going to zoom out a little bit, maybe be less specific than my colleagues. we talk a lot in education about mindset, drive, and grit being 3 components to sort of weather the storm of your personal life, your education life, your professional life. And I know that I have made some strides in this way, and I hope my colleagues have too, in understanding that no matter what challenge you face, all things are temporary, nothing is insurmountable. There's almost always a solution to every challenge, and just being flexible and riding out the storm. And if we have done all of the foundational things that we need to do in our fundraising shops that we should be doing all the time, we're better equipped to be able to ride out those storms because we have that foundation.
I think that's fantastic insight that works for both our nonprofits and us as individuals. We're more flexible and more able to weather the storms than we think. And I definitely feel that the last 2 years has shown that to myself. So thank you so much for bringing that up. All right, Meredith, would love to have you jump in here too. Is there anything you'd like to add about what you kind of hope people have learned from the past few years?
Yeah, I mean, something that I know I learned, and I hope others learned as well, is that while we need to learn from the past and the things that we have tried before, we can't build sustainable fundraising strategies by kind of relying on the concept of, well, this is how we've always done it. The world has changed. The ways that we interact with people have changed. The way that our offices work have changed. And all of those changes bleed into, so many of our fundraising trends, whether it's peer-to-peer events and what those look like now, or corporate giving and the way that companies engage their employees. A lot of things are different. And if we ignore the changes from the past 2 years, we're not going to be able to keep up. And it's ultimately going to cost us, revenue and time at the end. So I'm all about, learning from the past, but let's take the past 2 years, look at what's different, and then start doing things a little bit differently.
More fantastic insight. Thank you all so much. Great first question. Sabrina, I'm going to have you start us off with this next one. This next question has to do with kind of best practices. So what are some best practices nonprofits can utilize to help avoid obstacles in their fundraising efforts? And what are some strategies they can use to kind of minimize the obstacles?
Well, I'm going to go back to relationships. It's just look, we have to remember that fundraising is 60% cultivation, which is building relationships. So what nonprofits need to realize is that 75% of fundraising, which is building relationships, which is cultivation, is 60%. And then 15% is stewardship, saying thank you and maintaining those relationships. And so if you focus on relationships and actually aligning what the donors desire and what value that the nonprofit bring, putting that together and finding out what those donors are about and making that donor the hero and really doing that homework and putting that in place, that is going to change the dynamic of your fundraising. Because again, when a nonprofit starts talking about fundraising, this is the one thing that I noticed. Immediately people go to, oh my God, I don't want to ask for money. Oh, I feel very awkward asking for money. That's what we think of when we think of nonprofit and fundraising. And I really want to change that conversation and that dynamic, because fundraising, asking for money is only 5% of fundraising. That is it. And if I could get people to really focus in on building relationships, really finding out what makes donors tick, really finding out what their values are, really aligning with those values if your values align, and going forward based on that, it will make a huge difference in how you fundraise. Because we can't be afraid of that 5% of asking, and that kind of stops us in our track. It stops board members in their tracks sometimes. I've talked to some CEOs and it stopped them in their tracks. They don't want to do that part. And I say, step back. That's only 5%. Take people out to lunch, pick up the phone, call them, ask for advice. All of that is building relationships, and all of that will garner into a gift. And if you do that part right, when you do that part right, and I'm a witness to this, when you do that part right, 9 times out of 10, you won't even have to ask because you have built that relationship. They understand that need and they want to help. So that's my soapbox issue right there, building relationships.
Thank you for sharing with us. I'm glad we got to hear your soapbox issue. All right, Meredith, going to have you jump in. How can nonprofits reduce the potential challenges in which they might encounter when they're trying to fundraise?
Yeah, I would say a big part of it is accepting that you can't do everything all the time and really use your data to guide your decision making. I know Julia touched on tech and all of those kind of things. And I think frequently as fundraisers, we spread ourselves super thin and we try to do it all. And that's where a lot of our challenges start because we're either investing too much in something that's not effective or we're missing opportunities because we're trying to do everything at the same time. We're seeing more and more fundraisers using their data to guide their fundraising strategies, and your data will tell you so much about where you should be focusing the majority of your resources. Even Sabrina talked about relationships, even where to start, when you're focusing on those relationships, all of that information is available to you. It's just there for you to start actioning. And once you have that understanding, it allows you to make smart fundraising decisions to hopefully minimize the amount of challenges, but also allows you a little bit of time to buffer in, to track and pivot your strategies when those challenges arise, because they will. As perfect as we all think our fundraising strategies are, they're all going to have challenges. So it's about maximizing what you have to minimize those challenges.
Definitely. Okay, Shannon, what advice would you recommend to nonprofit professionals when they're trying to reduce future obstacles for fundraising?
So I think I'm going to be, I second Sabrina and Meredith and all of their comments about relationship building and about data and looking at your data, and that will tell you where you need to go. I think I'm going to be the boring one in the group in that I can't tell you how many clients that I work with from all across all budget sizes, from really small organizations to ones who you think should know better, who don't have those basic best practices in place around their CRM, around their constituent database. Making sure that the data hygiene and the data integrity is there, making sure that everybody's putting in their contact notes, making sure that you are taking advantage of some of the data that's out there easily accessible to us with regard to wealth research and data appends of different kinds. We can't analyze the data to show us where we need to go if we're not investing that basic time in inputting the most valuable, information about in our most valuable tool that we have. So I would just say kind of, shoring up those, when we shore up those basic tools that we use and depend on every day and the processes around them, it maybe isn't super exciting to some people. To data nerds it is, but to most people it's not exciting, but that's what springboards you into the exciting conversations and the exciting relationship building.
Definitely. I think that was very important based just solely on the number of nods you got from the rest of us. I think it's important information and an important reminder of going back to our basics. So thank you. All right, Julia, what would you like to add? What other best practices should nonprofits keep in mind to kind of try to do their best to ensure a smooth fundraising process?
Yeah, I definitely agree that everything that was just shared by the other panelists, I think I probably would have said something similar if I had gone earlier on in the process, but to kind of differentiate, a different sort of best practice to maybe avoid some of these obstacles is having a contingency plan. And of course, that can mean a lot of different things to different organizations. So if you have a big initiative or maybe an event coming up, making sure that you schedule in time as you're planning that out to say which pieces of this would be salvageable if X, Y, and Z went wrong. Like if we, maybe lost out on a certain source of funding, or if we have to pivot back to a virtual event because of, God forbid, something, some more shutdowns or things like that, what pieces of your upcoming plan could you still rely on and which ones would you need to pivot for? And then putting some thought into what exactly those pivots could look like and how you could plan for them. And of course, we obviously can't predict the future and don't know everything that could potentially happen with a fundraising campaign. But it is surprising sometimes to talk to organizations and find that they have really huge events coming up or really big initiatives or even like, communication campaigns and things like that. And that if something were to go wrong with them, they really wouldn't know where to turn or how to kind of navigate that change. So I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind if we're thinking of avoiding obstacles. And of course, too, like I said earlier, that can bleed into having the right data available to you and having those relationships with your donors and with your community, because I think those will be the pieces that allow you to pivot, right? You can't, if you don't have those things available to you, then what on earth are you going to do if you have to change your fundraising plans?
Definitely, definitely. Okay, Shannon, I'm gonna have you start us off with this next question. What can a nonprofit do or look at to measure the impact of their fundraising effort?
So, I mean, certainly there are a million different analytical tools that we can use, some of them within our databases, some of them are apps that we can, hook onto our databases to analyze that data. But I think, we often, in my work in managing capital campaigns for different clients, I always come in contact with board members or volunteers who just want to find that one huge donor. And that's where they're focusing. And it might be this donor that we have no connection to. There's like not even a sense of reality that we might be able to even get even a small gift from them. And so really having a good handle on the segments in your database, understanding their level of engagement, and not overlooking certain segments because maybe they haven't given yet. Or so, for example, in the olden days, we talked a lot about the donor life cycle and the different points of entry for donors, whether they came in first as a volunteer or a ticket buyer and kind of moved around the circle of engagement. And I think sometimes we lose sight of all of those points of entry and we think just of donation points of entry. And we're forgetting that, people who take advantage of our programs or services are also potential donors. And in some ways, we've already done some of the cultivation with them because they have seen the richness of the programs or the projects that we run. So, I just think taking, a deeper look and being, to use an overused word, being creative about how we're looking at the potential within our file. That's a bit of a general response, but you can see that I feel really strongly about data and making decisions that are data driven.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just thinking about, again, my personal experience, I feel like a lot of nonprofits that I donate to, I did kind of enter in a different capacity, whether I was a ticket buyer or something like that. So thank you for sharing. All right, Julia, how can nonprofits determine the impact of their fundraising efforts?
Yeah, I think that the easiest and most straightforward way that I think we probably all wish could be like immediately measured is if you're getting more donations or having more recurring donors or having larger gifts coming from initial donors. But obviously, that's not the only metric of success and can also take a long time to really translate into an actual measurable number. But I kind of want to lean on something Sabrina mentioned on the last question of really building your donor community or even just your organization's community, because I think that that can be such a huge measure of success that can then later translate into bigger gifts. I think you said, Sabrina, too, like if you have this really strong community and you really talk to the people who care about your mission, then you actually have to ask for make less fundraising appeals like later on because people just think of your mission more and recognize the impact that they have. So you don't have to kind of go like door to door type solicitation. And so I would say kind of seeing how much contact you're having with donors. Are they engaged when you try to contact them? Are they opening up your emails? Are they clicking through the links that you send to them? When you pick up a phone to talk to them, are your callers having the experience that people want to talk about your mission and learn more? Or are they having experience where they feel like they're just not super engaged with the community that you speak to? Because I think that that can be hugely reflective of your different fundraising campaigns and kind of how well things are going at your organization is really seeing, do I have an engaged community and do they want to talk about my mission with me? And hopefully that will translate, of course, into the greater donations in the future.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, Meredith, what are some ways nonprofits can measure if their fundraising efforts are proving effective or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of go back to data. I, like Shannon, am a big data nerd. So I would start with analyzing your historical data, talking to your team, talking to your leadership team and your board, and setting ambitious but realistic KPIs. The word realistic, I think, is such an important factor there, because while we sometimes think that, setting very aggressive KPIs will motivate our teams to achieve more, a lot of the time that backfires and it actually demotivates the team and can make them feel like they're being set up for failure. So setting KPIs that are, what I would call ambitiously achievable and determining, a clear path of action towards those is where those measurements really start. My next recommendation would be to not leave all of the evaluation until the end of your campaign. Evaluating your progress towards those KPIs is something that should be done almost daily when you're in a campaign and compared against what you're actually doing. So, as an example, it could be sending out an A/B test of an email that contains slightly different messaging and then comparing it, to see which messaging is most effective by pulling the open rates, the click-throughs, comparing it to how much money you actually raised that day. It's a really effective way of understanding in the moment what is working and what isn't. That's just one example, but there are tons of ways that you can do that. And doing this frequently while your campaign is in progress means that you don't have to wait until your next campaign to apply the learnings that you've gotten. You can start now, and it allows you to make constant improvements to your existing campaign and hopefully raise more money now.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sabrina, I want to have you jump in here. Any final advice on how a nonprofit professional might evaluate if their fundraising efforts are effective or not?
Yeah, that's hard because we are fundraisers, and we immediately my mind goes to, well, did we raise more money? That's the immediate result that we all want to say. Like, did we raise more money? But there are other things that things that need to be measured in that process of raising more money. And I'm going to go back, like, how many times did we tell our story? Because the one of the things that I realized in this journey, and that I've seen other successful nonprofits do, is those who tell a better story will tend to raise more money, right? And so we will forget data. I love you, Meredith and Julia. Data and Shannon. We will forget a number immediately. But if you tell me a story of a child or a story of a client, I'll remember that more. And so trying to make sure
Did Sabrina freeze for anyone else, or is it okay, I just wanted to make, sometimes it's my internet, but Sabrina, if you're out there, your internet has frozen for a moment, but hopefully we'll get you back soon because I want to hear the end of that sentence. Okay. Hopefully we'll get Sabrina back, but we'll keep moving and hopefully we'll get the answer to that. So we are about to turn it over to our audience and their questions. Hi, Sabrina, welcome back.
I don't know what happened, but anyway, my final point was making sure that we are about data and making decisions, but also remember that one of the greatest data points is storytelling. So making sure that we are measuring that and collecting those stories, because I'll remember a story before I remember a data point.
Definitely.
Sorry, guys, about that.
No, we're glad to have you back and glad to get to hear the end of your thought. I was just saying that we're about to turn it over to our audience if anyone has questions, as well as I have some questions pulled from the registration of when people signed up. So really looking forward to getting those answers. So if you're watching live, please let us know either in the chat or the questions function if there's a topic or a question you would like us to address. We want to make sure we can get to it. But before I move over to that, I do have one final question that my team has prepared. So Meredith, I'm gonna have you start us off on this one. How can nonprofits promote donor interest and engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with a well-rounded survey to your stakeholders that asks everything from, what fundraising initiatives are most interesting to them? What kind of mission updates are they wanting to hear about? What other ways are they interested in getting engaged with your organization, whether it be through volunteering or signing up for an event? And start collecting that information to better understand what would keep them engaged. And then once you have that information, you can start looking at what changes you can implement that meet your donor needs. And it could be big things, like maybe there's a revenue stream that you haven't explored yet, but that that a lot of people are eager to engage with. Or it could be smaller things like using that information to create or improve on a newsletter that would be more engaging because you're providing them with the information that they have identified as important to them. Like I mentioned earlier, the pandemic changed things, and what was important to donors before could be different now. And I think, rather than us fundraisers making assumptions on what our donors want, let's just start asking them. In addition to that, I would say, Sabrina touched on storytelling a little bit, and, I think that is a huge part of keeping them engaged. They want to feel that connection. And transparency and impact sharing are always really important to donors, especially your monthly and major donors of the future. Millennials, they're becoming the next generation of monthly donors. And, they're from a world where, I'm a millennial. I have 3 screens in front of me. I could get any information that I want available to me at any time. It's all here right in front of me, right? So putting that impact sharing front and center is really important to keeping those new donors and that next generation of donors engaged.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up generations because I feel like that's a really important topic for the nonprofit world. We have actually a whole panel on it at some point in the next few months. I know I've seen that title somewhere because it's definitely something that I've seen come up in the questions in a lot of various panels. So thanks for bringing it up. All right, Julia, what should nonprofit professionals keep in mind in order to generate high donor interest and engagement?
Yeah, I'm going to say maximizing your donor's generosity. So, what I mean by that is if you have, an individual who has supported you, they obviously care about your mission, they want to make an impact for your organization. And I think a mistake I've seen is that nonprofits will accept the gift, of course, and then they kind of leave the donor where they are at that existing level of support. So, maybe they don't reach out to invite them to an upcoming event, or they don't host any kind of like donor office hours or Zoom sessions where they can engage with your team. They don't reach out about maybe like matching gifts or workplace giving opportunities that the donor could use to maximize their impact. They don't reach out about volunteer opportunities if it's like a community based organization. And so they kind of let that donor to just lose the momentum that they had when they wanted to support your organization, and they become stagnant, right? And they're less likely to become a recurring giver in the future if they don't feel super involved with your organization. And so I think that there's this misconception that you don't want to bother a donor too much. You don't want to send them too many updates or send them too many messages because you don't want them to unsubscribe from your mailing list. And obviously, there's always a risk of that, and there's always a threshold of you don't want to be like harassing people that donate to your organization. But at the same time, donors are usually highly engaged with those types of messages. We see people, willing to donate more if they know that a gift is matched. We see people more likely to volunteer if they made a gift in the past. So knowing that your donors are people who care about your mission, that they want to push your organization forward, I think makes it kind of easier to wrap your head around the fact that you can reach out to them about other opportunities or other ways to get involved in your organization, and that that's a really great way to promote engagement and kind of further build that community that we've been talking about today.
Sure. Thank you. All right, Sabrina, how can nonprofit organizations increase donor interest and engagement?
Well, I'm just going to go back to what everybody has said and just reaffirm that absence does not make the heart grow fonder. In this case, it just doesn't. You need to be front and center at all times with your donors. Send them newsletters, invite them to events, and not just fundraising events, some hands-on volunteer events. Make sure that they are connected. Make sure that that they know, that they feel like that they have an inside know into your organization. There is nothing more frustrating than giving to an organization and even signing up like for a monthly reoccurring gift and you don't hear anything from them. You don't get a newsletter. You don't get a thank you card. You don't get anything. But then at the end of the year, for the end of year giving campaign, you get a request for more money. That's the opposite way in which you want to do this. You really need to make sure that you have a stewardship plan in place and a cultivation plan in place. Send them video. Tech makes it, as Julia said, tech makes it so easy for you to engage donors. You send them a video, have a client do a video, send it, send a text, make a call. All of these things are ways that you can engage your donor. And if you're a small organization, those are pretty simple ways that you can do it. It won't cost you a lot of time. You just have to be intentional about it and have a plan in place.
Great, thank you. Shannon, any last suggestions on how one might boost donor interest and engagement?
All of us, most of us, I don't want to say all, but most of us, I would assume, who work in this kind of mission-based work, it's not, we do it because we love it and we have a firm belief in the work that we're doing and the impact that it makes. But, there are days when it's not fun and it can be a bit of a slog. And in my fundraising life, I have found that the most successful way for me to prevent myself from getting in that slog is by doing developing personal relationships with donors. And I think of it more, it is cultivation, but as much as I can try to create a one-to-one type of relationship with them, I have found that it is most rewarding for me personally as a fundraiser. It's more rewarding for them as a donor, and there are better outcomes to be had for the organization. And so I just try to latch onto those things that are so special about the work that we do, and think about that relationship with donors as being a conversation, not like pushing out information or pulling them in, but more like a conversation where I'm always, there's a loop. They're sharing information. I'm sharing information. I'm remembering what they're passionate about, and then communicating back to them to Sabrina's point, when I have an impact story that I know that will really lift them up and get them engaged. So I think, really just leaning on that relationship piece, using all the tools at our disposal to do that, trying to, either if we're time limited, doing that ourselves. It's a great way to engage board members too in that one-to-one donor outreach. You can give them specific instructions and guidelines, and it's a way to get them supporting their organization in a non-monetary way. So I would just say, really just embracing that donor relationship and all of the richness that it provides in all of the different ways.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. I'm going to jump into some of our questions that were submitted in the registration. The first one, I'm going to have Meredith and Shannon answer because it's a data question. And so I know we have some interest in data. So the question is, how important is understanding donor data when it comes to preparing a fundraising strategy? So Meredith, would you start us off?
Yeah, I would say it is of the utmost importance. That data and what lives in your database is going to tell you exactly who your prospects should be, whether it's for peer-to-peer, whether it's identifying people who are maybe monthly donors that have capacity to become major donors. The more information that you can build within that database is really going to become what guides you. It helps you, figure out who should be pulled into your next campaign. It can help you understand how much you should be asking for. It's important when developing that strategy. And I would also say it's important when we're looking at turnover within nonprofits. I'm in Canada, so I don't know. The Great Resignation is a big conversation that is happening here. I don't know if that's happening in the States as well, but turnover is high at nonprofits right now, and a lot of the time you're saving grace in terms of when somebody new comes in and starts to pick that up and wants to minimize the amount of lag time between staff. That data can make the difference between securing your next gift or not. So I think it's hugely important, but I'll hand it over to Shannon.
Oh, HE double hockey sticks. This working with a variety of clients, and especially in a capital campaign environment, you can walk in and you see databases in all states of being, all shapes, and it can really impede a successful campaign. I mean, in a really big way. So, I mean, I second what Meredith said about, I just can't say enough about contact notes and about engagement notes and interaction. I mean, just putting a note in helps so much in being able to, cultivate that relationship and go to the donor with something that where they can recognize we know who they are, what's important to them, and it moves the conversation from a starting point into like a midfield position, like a good position. You're not starting from nothing, and they expect that. I mean, they might have been giving you gifts for 10 years, and then if you reach out to them like nothing about them, it can really turn them off and turn them away. So, that sort of thing, just making sure data is clean and correct. I mean, it's such a big topic. It's such a big topic, but I would say in capital campaigns, I've run into this just so many times where we have to kind of delay asks because that just daily basic maintenance hasn't been paid attention to.
Definitely. Okay, Julia and Sabrina, I want to give you a chance to jump in if you would like. Otherwise, I'll have you all start off with our next question. So would you like to jump in any way, contribute to the data conversation? All right, I'll take that as a no.
Well, we both unmuted. I just want to I wanted to speak to my CEOs out there that feel like they don't need to invest in a CRM system, because I was one of those. I was a little cheap. Okay, I'm just telling you. I did not understand the importance of the database. Now I do. And it's like what Shannon and Meredith is saying. I retired after running my organization for 20 years. And for like the first probably 10 to 15 years, I tried to do it in my head and I tried to do it using Excel. I just didn't understand. Now, the last years doing a capital campaign and leaving my organization, like Meredith saying, the great resignation, if that information wasn't there in that database, then an organization would really struggle. So it is worth the investment, because that's really what we're talking about at the end of the day. Do I want to take my money or the organization money and invest in a CRM system? And we're telling you, Shannon does capital campaigns. She's saying yes. Yes, you need to. If you're going to be successful at fundraising, you need to have a CRM system. Kind of point blank, period.
Julia, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that was shared. I think too, kind of going into the technology piece, like what you were just saying, Sabrina, that, and I think I might have mentioned this earlier as well, that if you have the right technology, and really not even insanely advanced technology, you can take that data and do so much with it. You can tailor your communications to donors so that it feels like they're getting like one-on-one personalized messages from, you're the president of your nonprofit or whatever else it is. It can feel so personal and so connected to your donor base with tools that are really not very inaccessible for most nonprofits. Most mailing systems have different ways that you can personalize messaging. And so I think just having that data with the right technology can push your organization like light years ahead than if you don't have access to the data and technology.
Great, Julia. I'll have you start us off with this next question, which is, what are ways to cultivate relationships if people aren't meeting in person? Which is definitely something we saw in the last 2 years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but I think you'll want to make informed decisions about how you cultivate virtual relationships, because depending on like the age of your donor base, they might prefer, I know we see this all the time, to be communicated to online in different ways. So I think, of course, if you have a presence on social media and your donors have a presence on social media, you can do public shout outs to donors that have made gifts or to people who have supported you or volunteered with you or something like that. Or you can, engage with people who are maybe tweeting about your organization or who have mentioned your organization. You can post different social media blasts to really get your message out there, and then engage with people who maybe comment or like your different assets that you put on social media. Of course, too, I think I mentioned this earlier, you can do different like virtual sessions, like even just like one-on-one, almost like panelist style or even like office hour style type of engagement sessions where you almost feel like you're sitting in the room with your donors or people that support you, and still get that kind of one-on-one attention. I think sometimes that can be more difficult if you have an audience that is less technically savvy and less technically literate, because of course then you're just not going to have as many avenues available to those folks to be able to reach them. But with that being said, I think the vast majority of people have some kind of email communication, some kind of text communication that you should be able to get in contact with them even without that in-person piece, and then talk to them about how they would best like to chat with your organization and if they would like to hop on like a Zoom session or something like that.
Sure. Sabrina, anything you'd like to add to that about connecting when not in person?
Well, connecting when not in person, I think that has been one of the things that the pandemic has taught us. That Zoom is in person, or sitting on these virtual conversations. We have to consider those to be in person now. I think people have gotten more comfortable with that. But another way I would say is, look, I only get junk mail in the mail. Let me just be honest with you. So if an organization sent me a birthday card or a Valentine's Day. When is the last time we got a Valentine's Day card? Like I was like in elementary or something like that. If I got a Valentine's Day card from a nonprofit organization, just getting mail these days is not considered junk mail. Is a good feeling that you can give your donors and engage your donors. They think about you. It's very simple things that people want when they give money to your organization, and they just really want to be thanked, and they want to know the impact. Those two things. And if you can do that in a timely manner, the 3 P's, a prompt thank you, a personal thank you, and program impact. Those 3 things are going to get you where you need to be as far as donor engagement. So keep it simple, right? It doesn't have to be that complicated. Keep it simple, but communicate and engage with your donors.
Great, great. Shannon, anything you'd like to add to this conversation about virtual or not in-person connection?
I don't think I can add anything. I think my colleagues have covered it pretty much. Just knowing how the donor wants to engage and trying to create the avenue for them to do that in the way that is most comfortable for them. We're all in. I think sometimes we should be donor centric, but we also need to understand that we're both we're really working in service of the mission, not in service of the donor all the time. It's really in service of the mission. And so however we can reach the donor in a really quality way to do that.
Great, thank you. And Meredith, anything you want to add? Just don't want to skip you, otherwise I can move to the next question.
I mean, I just have one thing to add to something that, Julia said about engagement opportunities and that kind of stuff. I think like looking at, sure, maybe the ways that we were doing things before weren't feasible during the pandemic, and things have changed now, but with that has come a ton of opportunity. I was working in peer-to-peer fundraising at an organization that is an oncology camp for kids with cancer when the pandemic hit. So that meant not only could we not host our event, but we also couldn't run camp. So our mission and our fundraising initiatives took a huge hit. And that group engagement that we were able to host over Zoom actually created a huge opportunity for us. We invited all of the participants from our peer-to-peer event. They came, they heard about our organization, they understood what we were investing the money that they were working so hard to raise in when we couldn't have camp. We could invite, a camper to come and speak to them, which wouldn't have been an option in person because those kids are immunocompromised, right? And it created a ton of opportunities. So I think there are really good ways that you can keep your donors engaged, whether it's on a larger scale or a smaller scale, through virtual touch points. And some of them even prefer it now, not having to leave their house.
Yeah. Definitely. All right, I want to sneak in one final question before we wrap up. I know we're getting to our end of time. The hour always flies by. But I think a lot about fundraising for difficult times, which is our topic. We can get a little focused on the future of preparing for kind of the next obstacle, the next thing. So I'm wondering if there's any advice on how to plan for the future, plan for when difficulties arise without kind of forgetting your present moment and your present goals. So Sabrina, I see you nodding your head. Can I call on you first with this question?
Yeah. I think that's a simple thing that organizations can do to start planning for the future. And that's have your board approve a resolution to start an endowment. People ask, how do you start an endowment? That's exactly how you start an endowment. You have your board pass a resolution that starts the endowment. Then how do you grow your endowment without doing an endowment campaign? Well, for those organizations that are lucky to end their year in the black, which I hope most of you are, then you have the board pass a policy that for anything, but when the year ends in the black, 20% of that will roll over into the endowment. And before you know it, you will have some rainy day money in your endowment. It's as simple as that. And then when you get a little bit more sophisticated, you can, like Shannon does capital campaigns, but maybe she'll go over into endowment campaigns. And you can call her and do a whole like endowment campaign. But keep it as, I'm all about keeping it simple and doing what is manageable for the organization. So if you take nothing else away from here, do a board resolution to start an endowment. To grow that endowment, just do a policy that says when we end in the black, 20%, 50%, doesn't matter what percent, will go into that endowment. And you'll have a cushion before you know it.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you brought this up. We actually had a panel last week entirely on endowments, and that was the same mentality. Start on Monday, start now, get it done. So glad you brought that up. And for people who are interested in hearing more about endowments, I can recommend the recording, which is available on the NXUnite website, just a little plug, but also because we're coming to the end of time. And so I can't grill Sabrina on endowments because there's always more to hear. All right, Shannon, anything you'd like to add in terms of planning for the future without getting kind of overwhelmed today?
I think that the phrase strategic planning has gotten a really bad name over the years, but I do think, it's an important process to go through, and it doesn't need to be an overly complicated process, but, visioning together, having a shared vision of where you're headed as an organization, and then having a plan, even if it's a loose plan, built in about how you're going to achieve those objectives and get to that vision place. That's what's going to inform your everyday work. And having that vision in front of you is what helps people drive you forward on the tough days. And having that, the vision and the mission check is really important from a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of a blending of the forward, of tomorrow and today.
Great. All right, Meredith, anything you'd like to add to this conversation about the future and the present?
Yeah, I would say don't underestimate your monthly donors. I think it's like on average, monthly donors give over 40% more than one-time donors. Even if that means asking for less in the moment, but encouraging people to become monthly donors, that is really building up your safety net. And I mentioned millennials earlier. Monthly giving is huge with millennials. That's what they understand, right? They pay their phone bills monthly. They pay their Netflix monthly. Having another monthly thing is not uncommon to millennials. So start looking at what that next generation is going to be looking to be doing, and start really building some strong strategies around what their interests are. And I would recommend starting with monthly because it's big with millennials.
Great. Julia, anything you'd like to add on this conversation?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that was shared. I think also referencing one of the answers I had earlier is just making sure that as you plan out your current present campaigns, thinking of your contingency plans for different facets of that campaign that might maybe get thrown off or get messed up or something like that. That can be a good way of just making sure that you're still engaged and present with your current campaigns, with your current plans, but then using that to structure any backup plans. Kind of tying those two things together instead of maybe viewing it as so isolated from the present and the future.
Great. All right, we're going to wrap up this portion. If you have any lingering questions, if you're watching the recording and you weren't able to submit them, please fill that out in the post-panel survey that you will be receiving via email, or if you're watching us live, it'll also be in the chat. This is a general feedback survey where we want to hear kind of what the panel experience was like for you, as well as what topics you would like to see in panels going forward. We have a full calendar of panels throughout the fall and winter, and we want to make sure we're kind of addressing the topics you're most looking for. Very quickly, I want to do a speed round set of questions to have a very final kind of goodbye from our panelists and a final answer. So today we talked about fundraising during difficult times, but there's obviously so many conversations we can have in relation to nonprofits that are important to be having now or in the coming weeks. So I'd love it if each panelist could very quickly share one topic that they're looking forward to having conversations of in the next few months, or they're hoping nonprofits will kind of be considering and talking about in the next few months. Julia, would you start us off with this one?
Yeah, definitely. I think anytime we talk about kind of difficult times or uncertainty, it opens up the idea of having different fundraising avenues, like we talked about a lot today. So I'm intrigued to see how those conversations continue, specifically about, maybe organizations talking about how they rely on just their standard online individual donor gifts and like just that one peer-to-peer campaign or something like that. How can they open up their organization to be able to receive things like volunteer grants, to receive things like different kinds of grants, like matching gifts, allowing donors to have all those different avenues and those different ways to give to your organization, and seeing how that can hopefully bolster organizations when there is economic uncertainty or any kind of difficulty that a nonprofit might be going through.
Great, fantastic. All right, Shannon, what conversations are you hoping we're having the next few months?
It's a little bit of a non sequitur to fundraising, but it may seem that way. But I really hope that nonprofits are understanding the situation they're in with regard to the Great Resignation and the huge amounts of turnover we're seeing in lots and lots of markets and nonprofits, and understanding how they can adjust, how they think about the people in their organization as the most important asset that they have, followed by their database, but their people being the most important asset, and creating an environment in which they can be fulfilled while achieving the organization's mission, and being really mindful about, I'd like to see boards be more mindful about the leadership they hire to ensure that happens in nonprofits.
Definitely. Thank you. All right, Sabrina, what conversations are you looking forward to?
Shannon and I got something going on, because that's exactly where I am at. I really feel like we need to invest in people, invest in the leadership of our organization. And when we're talking about investment, I am talking about, I know it's not all about pay, fundraising, it's not all about pay, but I think that we need to look at our pay structure for nonprofits, and particularly nonprofit leadership. We are in this because, yes, we love people and we want to solve problems. And I have this conversation with my husband all the time. And I tell him, we're nonprofits, we're solving world problems, poverty, lack of education, all of these things. But you get upset every time someone posts, do you know the CEO is making this much money? And I take offense to it, because I'm like, the guy who sold me the cell phone makes this much money and has a private plane and has this, and nobody seems to question that. But what world problem are they solving? And so I am going with Shannon on this one. Invest in leadership. Maybe we won't have the Great Resignation, because people are really tired of being overworked, underpaid, and stressed out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right, Meredith, any final things? What conversations are you hoping we'll have?
Yeah, those are all such amazing points. I really hope that nonprofits will continue to discuss, how to optimize what you already have, whether it be your data, like we talked about today, or building those relationships, and understanding what your community wants, and using that information to make calculated risks and try new things. Sometimes you don't know unless you try. So I hope that we continue to see that innovation in the nonprofit space. And there are tons of tools that exist out there, free and otherwise, to really help you do that.
Great. All right. With that, we've reached the end of our panel. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in person, there would be applause and everything, but for now, just know that I am very grateful to have had the chance to hear from you. I also want to thank everyone who attended live or is watching the recording. Really hope you enjoyed it and that you took something from it. And thank you for spending some of your day with us. As I mentioned, we have a packed summer, fall, winter set of panels. So please keep an eye on NXUnite either on LinkedIn or on the NXUnite website to make sure you don't miss it. We have a variety of panels on topics related to fundraising, boards, leadership, associations, if that's where you factor in, all sorts of different topics. So keep an eye out. Also, sign up for NXUnite if you're a nonprofit professional, because then you can begin to earn cost coins by attending these panels, and you can redeem those for software subscriptions as well as free consultations. So little plug to sign up for NXUnite too, so you don't miss out on anything. As mentioned, we will be sending out that survey. So please take a chance to fill it out if you have a moment, just so we can continue to improve our panel process. And I think that's it for me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.